all for joining us. I'm going to start with just a question to kind of get a feel for the room. How many of you know about any type of civic technology project that is happening not in the United States? If you could just raise your hand. Okay, great. How many of you would like to learn more about those? Yay, that's why we're here. You guys are in the right place. Perfect. So I'm going to start with just setting the stage a little bit, give you guys a sense kind of the broader picture of the work that I have been fortunate enough to learn about, and then introduce our amazing panelists who thank you guys so much for joining us and for making the trip and being here. It's a pleasure to see you all again. So to give you guys kind of some context is that Code for All started really because of this idea that there were all of these groups that were doing wonderful work in different parts of the world, and those groups didn't know each other. So this really speaks to the power of networks. If one person's working on something in one country and the other one is working on that same project in another country, but they don't know each other exists, how are they supposed to collaborate and actually make their project better and work together? Share their lessons learned, hopefully not repeat the same mistakes. I'm sure we've all been in that situation. And so that was really the impetus behind the idea of Code for All, which has evolved to be an international network of groups in different countries who are trying to make their countries and their local communities better places. And it's really grown. It started with 3 founding members kind of convened by Code for America, and now it's become, as one of the fellows from Mexico City calls it, a gran familia. So a big family. And I can tell there's some Spanish speakers in the room by the way people responded. And I really am just really proud to be a part of this community and grateful for everyone who has come together to share their stories and to really contribute to this community, even though they're working so hard to get their own projects going in their own local countries. So with that, I will leave it to, first we're going to start with Sheba. And Sheba was a Code for America fellow, and she is now the VP, let me make sure if I get this right, the VP of Product at Lux. And her background is in user experience at Yahoo, and she's also the founder of Code for Pakistan. So she's going to give us some ideas and kind of tell us a little bit about her own experience really getting Code for Pakistan up and running. I have just been incredibly impressed by the work she's done. She's done it in an incredibly short time period, and also very thoughtfully about how to actually take the learnings and the work of civic technologists in other places and community members and really kind of harness those things to try to make Pakistan better. So with that, we'll give it to you. We can give a round of applause.
This is kind of out of order, so just bear with me. But basically, it was January of 2012, and it was the first day of the fellowship program. And I remember talking to Jen Palka and telling her that I wanted to start Code for Pakistan. And as I was explaining to her, now this is in January 2012 when there weren't any international partners, and I was telling her about the challenges that Pakistan had. I remember her, sort of being very supportive, and then eventually she's kind of like, wouldn't it be easier to start with Code for Canada? And it's true, she was very supportive. The challenges are so different than in a developed country like Canada or the US, where you take it for granted that people want to do the right thing if only we could show them how, right? So after Code for America in 2013, I went to Pakistan, where I met a couple of really amazing women, and one of them owned a co-working space. My first step following the lean startup approach before creating an organization or even talking to government was to test the hypothesis that there was even interest in civic hacking from the citizen side. So with less than 2 weeks of notice, these 2 women helped me pull off Pakistan's first civic hackathon in Karachi on no budget. So 10 days before the hackathon, we put up an application form with 9 serious essay questions and shared it on Facebook and Twitter. And in 6 days, 111 people had applied. Most of them had never participated in a hackathon before. So we taught them user experience design and how to use GitHub, and they came together to create 10 very useful prototypes. We weren't offering any prizes, and we were lucky someone offered to sponsor the meals, but it was incredible, and everyone left feeling very inspired by the notion of civic hacking and Gov 2.0. So I tested my hypothesis, check. Then through a series of serendipitous occurrences, I was asked if I could do this with the government in Peshawar. Now, if you're not familiar with Pakistan, Peshawar is the capital of the province that's in the news daily, which means that that's where the Taliban are and that's where the bomb blasts are exploding, etc. So of course I jumped at the opportunity, much to my family's horror, and that led to the out of order, but Peshawar Civic Hackathon. And yes, there were a couple of bomb blasts while I was there, but what stayed with me was the authentic, down-to-earth gratitude of the people there to have such an opportunity. It was surreal that our hackathon was opened by the chief minister, who's the highest authority in the province, along with the IT minister. It's a new government there, which of all the provinces, governments that I've met with, I've found to be the most eager to collaborate with non-governmental organizations, outside groups, move quickly and make change happen. The hackathon went well and the government was engaged. So we launched the Peshawar Fellowship Program, which, with some of the hackathon projects. We have 12 fellows, including 2 women, which is a pretty big accomplishment for Peshawar. They're paid a stipend by the government, and we have an awesome fellowship program manager who works closely with me to plan the fellowship program in line with our values of user-centered design, lean startup, and open source technology. And I'm really excited we were able to bring Ali here, our fellowship manager, without whom we couldn't have done it. This is his first trip outside of Pakistan, and he's been a Code for America fan for years. So the 6-month fellowship program, is coming to a close in 2 weeks. And the fellows have created 5 applications for things like energy and energy theft and disaster survey and health. They've held a write-a-thon, they've learned a lot, and they've had a lot of fun. And now the fellows will be launching a Peshawar Brigade. And now I'm going to go back a few slides. But right after, or the weekend right before the Peshawar Civic Hackathon, I also ran the Lahore Civic Hackathon, which was in yet another province. I don't recommend doing 2 hackathons in 2 different provinces on 2 consecutive weekends unless you want an ulcer. But we had some great apps that came out of the event. And one team that formed during the event, they quit their day jobs, those guys, and they're taking their carpooling app forward in an incubator as a civic startup. At Code Across this year, do we have any slides for the Lahore Brigade? This is a totally different presentation, by the way, so I'm just like winging it. But at Code Across this year, we launched the Lahore Brigade in partnership with a university group. And 4 of the apps that came out of the Civic Hackathon have been deployed as part of the brigade. So we did all of this in 9 months. And I'll take you back to the timeline. So we did all of this in 9 months with no organizational funding or budget. We've been a team of largely volunteers, and we're distributed all over Pakistan and the Bay Area, so we don't have like an actual office space. But I'll share some lessons learned during the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Ziva. Let's give it up for her. Very, very impressive. So now I'm going to introduce our next panelist. And I also realized I didn't introduce myself. My name is Lynn Fine, and I'm from Code for America, and I manage our international efforts. So in case anyone was wondering, what I'm doing here, who I am. So Matthew, am I allowed to share your news? It's just with
I've done questions always.
Okay, good. So Matthew, I have known Matthew for about a year now, and he is the founder and executive director of Slashroots, which is a civic technology organization based out of Jamaica, but that works all over the Caribbean. Some of the other Slashroots teammates are here. Can you guys raise your hands so people can see you? Yeah, they were incredibly hospitable to me when I came to Jamaica. I was very, very appreciative. And Slashroots is really working with this idea of how can civic technology make a difference in developing countries with service delivery, with building trust in government. And they have done a slew of different projects, and they've done so also, similar to Sheba's experience, on a shoestring budget, really with just kind of the will to get something done and extreme dedication. And Matthew is the founder and executive director, and he has been basically working 2 full-time jobs for how long? I don't even know. A long time. While I was in Jamaica, he actually fell asleep at the table a couple of times, and he has now quit his second job so that he can dedicate himself full time to Slashroots, working with his really amazing teammates. So I'll leave it up to him to tell the story of what they've done, mainly in Kingston, but also throughout the Caribbean. And let's give it up for Matthew Mcnaughton.
As Lynn said, my name is Matthew Mcnaughton. I work with this great team here. It's from Jamaica. And we were one of the first founding international partners for Code for All. And glad to now be a member of La Familia. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience going through this, but specifically around some of the lessons learned from what we did in the region. So, there we go. All right, so I think we kind of got an introduction of who we are, and just a quick recap. What /Roots is a civic tech nonprofit that's based in Kingston, Jamaica, that works with government or development partners to be more responsive to the communities that they serve. And we work with them to better use technology, but also a number of other things as well. And it really started as a core group of technologists and designers across the region, which has grown to over about 250 engineers and designers working on tech-related things. Through that network of persons, we've, for the last 3 years, organized this open data conference and developing tech and development conference called Developing the Caribbean, which we do simultaneously across multiple islands in the region, where each local partner works to open up data, work with government agencies to define problems, and then show what's possible through that. And so you could have, people in Cuba working on data and problems in Jamaica, kind of very much in the spirit of regionalism. And DevCA is really good for raising awareness around this type of work and kind of starting some discussions, but it's not necessarily good. Big events aren't necessarily great for facilitating behavior change and really sustaining the engagement you need to see and push initiatives through the public sector. And so kind of with that in mind, we're saying what is the right modality to push that discussion forward? And so within that context is when this idea of this fellowship program came about. And I remember, from the first day that video with Mark Zuckerberg came out, I was just like, yep, that's it. That kind of was the first call to arms around CFA. And so in thinking about how do we engage the governments in the region, we have to also put it within a context of what does the region actually look like. And so in many cases, most governments in the region are highly indebted. And so I think last year, the Congress here everyone's making a hissy fit about the US government reaching about 10% GDP to debt ratio. In Jamaica, it's 140, right? We spend almost twice as much on debt reservicing as we do on health and education combined. And so when you talk about reform within government and reform in service delivery, we're talking about in a context when a lot of money is getting spent on things that the majority of the government's money is getting spent on things that have nothing to do with service delivery, and resources are very much at a premium. And so as we were thinking of how do we transition from DevCA to something else, we wanted something that obviously was more than a hackathon. We wanted to look at, how can we focus the discussion around impact? Because events are great for being proof of concepts, but we wanted to affect service delivery. We knew that there are things around resources, and we had to change the way government was also thinking about risk within the agencies. And so there's one agency in particular that has been really supportive of DevCA from the beginning, and it's the RADA, the Rural Agriculture Development Authority, which is the government's interface to the agriculture sector. And so they're on the ground, they do extension services, they collect a lot of information. But RADA doesn't have a great time. They're frequently criticized for not having enough, for not doing enough, for farmers not seeing their extension officers for years. But a lot of this is systemic. Some of it is because resources aren't available. There are lots of different reasons for why that happens. But they were open and willing partners, and so we approached them around this idea of the fellowship program, and they were willing to participate. And so then it became an issue like, how do we bring a number of other partners to bear and work with them around this problem? How do we create the space to collaborate? How do we bring different skill sets to the avenue? And so it was great. We worked obviously with CFA. There have been a number of other partners that have been supporting the work over time. But then we said, all right, so now how do we build this team? And we were lucky. It was very much a pilot. A shoestring is a complement to, oops. Oh, okay, all right, keep working. All right, twice as effective. And so we, similar to what Chiba is saying, we put up an application 2 weeks. I remember the first time I spoke to Catherine, was introduced to Catherine, we were talking this Code for All thing. Just like, are you guys interested? And I was like, well, we're launching in 2 weeks, so we'd love to be a part of it, but it's gonna happen anyway. And I think that was great that we were able to find that balance. So the team came together. But what the things that you become very clear of when you try to do this work in a different context is that when people are struggling to find resources, there's not a lot of opportunity in Jamaica. Youth unemployment is about 18%. And so when you think about the idea of civic participation, it's very much within the context of someone trying to balance how they're going to make money and how they're going to live a livelihood with this idea of nationalism. And there has to find that balance between those things if people are going to have the luxury of kind of volunteering. And that was definitely something that a wall that we ran up into as we weren't able to pay the fellows comparable salaries to what they would have gotten in another context, but we were able to make it work. And then also, what are the skill sets you want to bring to bear? So there are a lot, you kind of saw the slide with the partnerships. There are a number of other persons that we brought to ways to show value, getting to work with the D School at Stanford, we're getting to work with Reboot as a design organization. And those things kind of help to change the schema both with the outside of government as well as in government. The fellows got lots of training. So, Sunlight Foundation, Reboot, they did design workshops. We did workshops around training and capability building and kind of creating APIs. And those things are useful for creating that value to kind of sustain interest when we couldn't necessarily provide the financial incentive. Lynn came. We enjoyed it. We enjoyed her company. There may have been some times when we all slept in this place, apparently. And then you kind of talk about, just quickly on the process, very much focused around this user-centered approach to thinking about service delivery. And we've heard a lot of that over the last couple of days, looking at working with the government agencies, like how do we move them through that process? And that was very much a part of the behavior change that we wanted to facilitate, that we saw the fellowship as a key vehicle through which to do that. There are two things that came out of the fellowship program. Harvest API, which is a platform for sharing agricultural sector information. So both across government and as well as with the public, as well as CLIP, which is an SMS service based on top of Harvest. So a couple just quick lessons learned coming out of some of the things that to do this work and kind of facilitate the culture change. Much of the fellowship, the fellowship is good at doing is facilitating a relationship of trust. And obviously going there with the government partners, talking to them, learning what their challenges are, being empathetic in that process is really key to any honest conversations about reforming anything. Technology at its core is the value proposition of the partnership. And even though it's not the only thing that we do, if the technology fails, a lot of the other things that you're trying to do really fall apart because it becomes a case of, well, these things are nice, but I have to provide this service. And if what you're talking about is based on the tech, then those things, when you're being criticized in the public all the time, are really critical. And then, I think the things that we all are struggling with is that sustainability models differ. And from the beginning, you have to be thinking about what is the ways in which we're going to sustain this work. And I'm sure some of these things will come up, but I wanted to give a quick overview.
Thank you, Matthew. So next up, is mic working? Yeah. So next up, last but certainly not least, is Julia Klober, who is coming to us from Germany. I also had the pleasure of going and visiting her and the rest of the Open Knowledge Foundation team. If you guys want to raise your hands, who's in the room? There's Fiona and Daniel. Welcome. Thank you guys for making the trip. And the Open Knowledge Foundation Germany chapter, they decided that they were going to start as one of their projects a Code for Germany project. And Julia is the project lead on the Code for Germany Open Knowledge Labs, which are volunteer chapters throughout Germany, and they've been incredibly successful. I'll let her tell you more about them. And then also, let's see if I can get this right, the Stadt Land Incubator? Code Incubator, which is Stadt is city and land is country. And that's another project they're working on. And Julia's background is in design and media thinking, and they've just done an amazing job of really getting a program up and running and trying to harness community members and the talent that they have and really make a difference on transparency and actionable civic technology applications in Germany throughout the country. So if you can give it up for Julia.
I'm Julia. I work with the Open Knowledge Foundation in Germany, and since 8 months we are running Code for Germany, and it's not only me, it's also Fiona, Daniel, our colleague Marcus is here too, with the support of Code for America, Catherine, Lynn, Fumi is there in the back, so lots of people involved. And this is what we do. We do community building for data-driven innovation in civic tech. And in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to run you through how we started, what challenges we were facing, and our plans for the future. So this is Code for Germany. We initially, when we started the conversation with Code for America like 1.5 years ago, I think, we initially planned to start with a fellowship program because we were big fans of Code for America. We knew like their great work, and we, as Open Knowledge Foundation, had been running hackathons, had been running a nationwide app competition, and we wanted to take all that to the next level and start a fellowship program so that developers would collaborate with city governments. And but we realized very soon that we had to prepare the ground first before we could start with the fellowship program, because in Germany people knew about open data. We've been advocating for it. Cities had open data portals, but barely anyone knew about the concept of civic tech. So there were a lot of data portals, like the one of Hamburg, that's a pretty new one, and cities opened up their data. But the tools, like people were not reusing the data sets for 2 reasons. The juicy bits of open data were still not opened up, and there was almost no exchange between the reusers and the data providers. So that was one problem we were facing, and that's why we decided to kick off the Brigades program, the community approach. We decided to build a community, to grow a community that reuses data, that produces best practices, to help open up more data, and to help establish the concept of civic tech and how developers can create useful tools out of open data. So we have a focus on open data. We kicked off on the 22nd of February, International Open Data Day. That's a screenshot of the meeting in Berlin. And 1 month before we kicked off, we had a meeting with Lynn and Hannah and invited community leads from cities all over Germany to join us and presented the concept. And we were overwhelmed by their feedback. So many people wanted to be part of it. That's why we immediately kicked off with 13 labs, city labs all across Germany. We call them labs, not brigades. And they are super active. They meet, like in Berlin, we meet on a weekly basis since February, every week. Most of the other labs meet bi-weekly. That's a screenshot of the community in Berlin. That's some stats. 13 labs. They've had over 100 meetups so far, 4,000 hours of programming. With more than 50 apps, visualizations, and prototypes were developed throughout the last 8 months. You can check them out on our website. That's a snapshot I had to zoom out. That's the Berlin lab and the projects they're working on. This is one of the projects. You can subscribe to planning alerts in your neighborhood. This is another one, a 3D tour for a referendum that was held in Berlin earlier this year in collaboration with a local news organization. That's another collaboration with a local news organization in Heilbronn, a small town in Germany, where people can compare the quality of their drinking water. And that's from Hamburg. In Hamburg, the lab focuses on data journalism, so they took statistics from their city and mapped what areas of the city lack playgrounds. So there's like all these interesting, cool approaches, and Hamburg focuses on data journalism. There's other labs that focus on city planning, and it's great to see what the community is working on, and that we're able to get their work out there via Code for Germany. And this is all just the beginning. For next year, we're planning to expand the labs. We have already 6 requests for 6 more labs in Germany, requests for 6 more labs. We want to focus a bit more on real-world problems, bring the labs together with their cities, with associations in their cities, and focus on the problems rather than only the data sets. We're planning an incubator for Berlin to help take some apps to the next level and support civic tech and open data startups. And our colleague Marcus is working on a Pearson partner network, so we also want to connect pioneers within city government with one another so that they can share their experience and knowledge. Yeah, and I'm very excited for the Q&A now. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. That's great. So as you guys can see, there is a lot going on all over the world, and I hope that that has given you just, that's just a taste. It's like a very, very small slice. Right now, there, just to my knowledge, which is, admittedly very limited of what's going on in the world, there, I know of 30 programs in 11 countries, and these were 3. So there's a lot more happening, and I think now we really want to open it up to Q&A from the audience. So please ask questions for our panelists. They're here. Yes, starting with you. If you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
My name is Nikki Hirani. I'm all things civic innovation for the city of Houston. One of the things that I struggle with the brigade, our brigade is great in Houston, but it's a small community of purely developers and designers and things like that. How do you get beyond that small community to the overall community that you're actually trying to benefit with these apps?
Great. Great. So I'm just going to repeat the question just in case everyone didn't hear. But so you're from the city of Houston, and you guys have a great brigade that's working there. But the question is, how do you move beyond just the developers who are in the brigade and actually involve a lot of community members and make sure that the people you're trying to serve are actually engaged? Is that a fair characterization? So yeah, whoever wants to speak to that, I'm sure you guys all have good input into that.
So I can take a pass at that. I think one of the things, for instance, for us, we have started things with events, and they have led to programs. But when you do something called a hackathon, you're battling that notion of, only attracting a specific demographic of people. So we have, for instance, done a write-a-thon where lots of different community members, people who don't typically go to these types of events, older people, people who are just want to be part of rewriting their city, they can participate in that type of event. So I think part of it is to have a variety of different types of events that you do and get the word out in that particular way.
Great. Matthew or Julia, anything to add?
Oh, this mic's through?
Yeah.
So when we started, we were focusing on developers and designers, so that because we had some developers in the team, and what they would tell us is like, focus on the developers, because if you start and there are a lot of people who just want to talk, then no one's ever going to build something. So when we kicked off, we really had like this hands-on focus. And right now we're opening up and checking and telling the labs and the lab leads, like, check what other community groups are out there that lack of technical skills and that need your expertise. And that's what I mean when I talk about focus on real-world problems, connecting to communities that are out there and that we can help with our skills, and not only like pivoting around our technology open data focus.
Hello. Okay, go on. All right, no worries. I think similar experience in the Caribbean as what Julia is talking about. The evolution of our community and our organization in many ways is moving very closely with the evolution of the tech ecosystem in the region, which is still quite nascent. And so it's a question of, well, how do you build the capacity for people to even understand that they should go and talk to their users as part of their design process? Whether it's you want to create, Facebook version 2, or you want to create something for farmers, that education is something that we've continually tried to battle against. But again, it's very much a process that we've seen, and which is part of why the fellowship was an idea, because we could work with people through that process and show, well, here's the value of doing this thing this way, and to kind of have that ripple on to the rest of the community.
Great, thank you, everyone. That's a great question. Next question. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Sarah Welsh from National Democratic Institute, and one of the things that we're trying communities, civic activists, people within government that are interested in reform. And so, from your standpoint, what do you need from us so that we can make that connection?
So the question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like what you're asking is, how do you build bridges between existing networks of people who are working in politics or people who maybe have a lot of influence in the community with these budding civic tech networks? Is that a fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Who wants to take it?
My immediate response to that is kind of twofold. I think one, and Laura Ellen, who isn't here, but was giving a great presentation this morning about the idea of inclusivity and for and versus with, is kind of the immediate thing that comes to mind. I think in one instance, yes, we want to build those bridges with kind of those other groups. In Jamaica, we have the Jamaica Civil Society Association. There's a media, there's a press. But I think it's also the other side of it, and kind of where our attention has been, which doesn't necessarily answer your question, is, well, what about those people that we're trying to work for, or so to speak, or what is the problems that we're trying to solve, and who is actually at that table? And so I think in many ways, the same issues that exist in terms of connecting with your types of organizations, we should also be asking for talking to the persons who are involved in the process. I'm not quite sure what the right mediums to close all of those bridges are in a constructive way. But I think those are just kind of the immediate thoughts that came to mind as you were asking that question.
Sheba or Julia, do you guys have anything to add?
I think it's about helping us to helping us to spread the stories from the labs, from the communities, because what we see right now is, when we initially were planning to work on the fellowship, we would approach cities, and now that people help us to get the stories, the applications, the visualizations, the prototypes out there, we get approached by cities when they're planning to build a data portal, or they need a data wish list that they want to crowdsource together with the community. So that's a really interesting change.
I think for us too, part of it is, one of the big things on our roadmap this year is doing open data, and sort of working on that in partnership with the International Center for Journalists, doing more data-driven journalism. And in doing that, I think we're going to be reaching out to a lot of different civil society organizations, government organizations, obviously, and so yeah, we'll probably experience that pretty soon.
Next question or comment, Justin?
It's for Code for Germany. You guys are an interesting hybrid, because you've almost kind of twinned or grown out of another open data movement, which is Open Knowledge Foundation. So, and your labs are branded as OK Labs. So how do you manage that merger of two communities? And is it actually a merger, or are they two separate organizations, and how do you balance that?
So I'm going to just repeat the question really quickly for the audio. But so Justin Ehrenstein, who's from Code for Africa, is asking, the Open Knowledge Foundation, Berlin, and Code for Germany, and the fact that there is kind of this merging of worlds and of communities, and so wondering, thank you. And so the question is how they are managing kind of the branding and the messaging around that, if I'm understanding correctly.
Two different communities.
And
These are different communities.
right.
Open Knowledge Foundation are a lot of the people you were speaking about. Social activists, academics, and other kinds of content activists. And you're blending them now with more civic tech kind of.
Yeah, so how Code for Germany, Open Knowledge Foundation, which even in the name, it talks about different communities, how they're managing those different communities in their work.
It's still two rather small communities compared with other big communities. So we thought, why not bring those two communities together? And Open Knowledge Foundation has always been working on tools as well as research. But currently there's more a research focus at Open Knowledge. And we thought, why not partner with Code for America and work on civic tech and actually reuse open data, because that was our focus in the past couple of years in Germany, opening up more data. And then all of a sudden some data was out there and no one was reusing it, and we were like, all right, so what's going to be the next step now? And that's when Code for America and the whole international program was a great opportunity for us to learn from, to share experience and knowledge, to not start from zero, and to connect with other communities. Like there's Code for Africa, there's lots of great stuff going on in Argentina, for example, in Chile, Mexico City. So I think it's not too much, we shouldn't think too much about branding. I know that when it comes to funding, then branding is always a big issue, but we thought let's not discuss too much about branding, but start to collaborate and then figure out the branding. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So we're almost out of time. We have time for one more quick question. I think only one of the panelists will have time to answer, because I want to give you guys each a chance to just leave our audience with a couple, maybe one sentence of advice after that. But let's do our last question, then we're going to have to wrap up. So Jesse.
So this is primarily a question for, I don't know your name, Jamaica?
Yes, that is my name. That works.
You said that there was great regional coordination on working on the project, and that's something that, so I'm Jesse Rosa, captain of Code for San Francisco, and I'm very interested in coordinating among sort of regional brigades and having, we have a PHP expert in Sacramento, and we don't have any PHP experts in San Francisco, how we can get that PHP expert to work on the project for San Francisco, or maybe for both, but whatever. How has that sort of, how did that begin? How did you begin that coordination, and then how has that developed and grown?
So Jesse's question, he's the brigade captain for Code for San Francisco, and it has to do with how you're really able to leverage, I know we overuse that word, but leverage regional networks, and just basically the idea that if someone has skills in one place, how you're able to use that in another. And I actually have one thing to add, but I'd love to hear what Matthew has to say.
So the Caribbean is notoriously bad at regional integration. It's there are exactly, and there are a lot of supposedly big fish in a very small pond, and I think there's also this notion, because we're all small islands, that there's this intense competition amongst ourselves. I think what's been interesting so far is that a lot of those, maybe it's an evolution of the cooperation, right? A lot of those networks have happened in isolation, and then you have these key focal points that kind of jump across different pools. I mean, we were very deliberate from the beginning of branding Roots as a regional community, and so it was one of those things where often persons say, "Well, a lot of your members are in Jamaica." I was like, "Well, that's just because that's the current state. It's not so much that that's the intent." And so eventually it came to this point where members of the community would start doing things locally as well. And so there's one member in particular who's doing quite a bit of work in Barbados, but we still battle with some of those silos. But I think that identity as something that's greater than just a national thing has been really valuable for persons collaborating across. And so when people are responding to things in the Roots community, it's not because, I'm responding on behalf of Barbados or Jamaica. In my case, it's because I have a problem and I'm trying to get someone to answer. Even just that, we just remove, from our point, we just removed the Jamaica altogether. It was a regional thing. And then persons may do national type stuff as well, but Roots itself was always Caribbean based. So I think over time we'll see more and more regional collaboration, which we have seen, but I think for the most part, branding is a key thing of that.
Great, well, thank you. So I'm going to have to wrap up pretty soon. So unfortunately, we don't have time for other questions. I did notice there were some other hands. So if other people do want to come up to us afterwards, I'd be happy to stick around, and I'm sure that our panelists would be willing to as well. Just a couple of things that I want to really leave the group with, which is, it's a group effort to kind of connect, and it takes a lot of work. But I do really believe that there is a lot of value in us sharing our lessons learned and doing that. I personally am going to undertake a lot of work around figuring out what's working where. For people who want to get started, The Code for America Brigade program is open internationally, and Code for All right now is really as a community deciding how to take in new members, and we're really trying to be thoughtful about how we build out resources that can support groups in their efforts and that really share the successes of all of the different Code for All partners and other groups who are, in this larger gran familia of civic technologists and people who care about impacting their community. But I think we're very, very open and very eager and hungry for suggestions about how best to do that. So I really would appreciate any input. And then what I want to kind of leave you guys with is just a couple, if you can each just say, one sentence. If there's someone out here who's thinking of starting something, what's something where you're like, wow, I really, really wish someone had told me that. Preferably something hopeful. Let's leave on a positive note. It's the last day of the conference. Let's, give us some inspiration. No pressure.
Sure. So we've done everything, pretty much everything in partnership with others. And I can't sort of emphasize the importance of the right partners. So finding people whose values are aligned with yourself, but making sure you have that discussion up front so you know that their values are aligned with you. And then once you find people whose values are aligned with you, then make sure that it's really rare to get that kind of good partner, so make sure you keep them happy.
Yeah, and this is going to plug a little bit, and maybe persons are going to hear the partnership thing a lot. A poor man doesn't choose money as his weapon. And so we never had a lot of resources, so our value add to a lot of the organizations and partners that we worked with had to be something else. And I think people underestimate that value contribution. I think we've made a lot of progress just like starting, getting stuff moving, doing the follow-up, all of those things. And I can't underestimate just like keep pushing, even if you don't have the budget that you need, that those things can also come.
I would say practice what you preach. Get the community involved as early as possible. As soon as you start drafting your concept, get the community involved. Don't confront the community or people with a concept you already mastered and you just wanted to execute. That would be an advice.
Great, yeah, so for people who want to learn more, there's information at codeforall.org, and then for people who are interested in starting, kind of organizing and really the model that Code for Germany and that also that in Lahore they've taken on with brigades and OK Labs, the Code for America Brigade program is open to international groups, and that's codeforamerica.org/brigade, and we're happy to answer any questions, and thank you guys so much for your interest and for coming, and thank you to our amazing panelists. It's so nice to have us all together. We do hangouts a lot, so it's like, oh, you guys are real people, and 3D. It's so much better. So yes, thank you to everyone, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.